Early November, Hattrick made an announcement nuking the future coach market out of existence. This decision was cancelled an hour after release, but the damage has been done and the market haven't recovered since. A few days ago, we had another announcement, and during all this time, some managers are furious on the forums, while others think justice has been done. Let's figure this out. Hey guys, I'm Papa Mish, and first of all, let me wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And now let's try to tackle this burning potato, being the future coaches. You either use it or hate it, but everyone has an opinion about it. The initial announcement followed a 600 post thread. Then we had another discussion speaking about ideas for future coaches, and it had 1,000 posts, and a second discussion with over 800 posts, and the last announcement 5 days ago followed over 500 posts. So I had a lot of reading to do. But before speaking about the actual announcements, let's try and understand what are future coaches all about and why had this market bubbled out of proportion. Future coaches are players with solid leadership and high experience, and I'll neglect the possible leadership players for this explanation as they are not part of the future coach bubble. There is two ways of hiring a coach in Hattrick: the external system or using one of your own players. The external system is someone no one really uses, apart maybe from very new teams taking a solid coach with no leadership at all, or while you're taking a cheap temporary coach while doing the coach trick. That's pretty much it. There is an insane 18 million euros tag prize for a solid leadership, excellent coach from the external system, but no one really even looks at it, as converting one of your own players with high experience will be much cheaper. Every player in Hattrick has a market value. It depends on his skill levels and other attributes compared to his age. With time, the player will get older, his skills will decay, and eventually his market value will be rendered to zero. But that's not the issue with future coaches, as their leadership and experience will never decay, so they will maintain a certain market value, as you could always turn them into a future coach for your team. Or you could sell them for someone else to do the same, and no one really had an issue with this before 2014. Back then, Hattrick considered hoarding to be a big problem, as teams would go years without being competitive, accumulating enormous amount of money while playing in the bottom division, and then buying a top-tier team overnight and trying to win the cup while playing in a bot league, burning all their money for instant success. To tackle this issue, Hattrick introduced the financial fair play within their new staff system. Every team could hold up to 15 million euros as liquid cash, 25 if you have the financial director, and everything else would go to your reserves, which you practically can't touch. This directly targeted hoarders, as they could no longer build a new team overnight, while normal teams could afford themselves improve with a couple of good players or great trainees. But the hoarders did not take the verdict, and they tried to find alternative solutions to circumvent the financial fair play. And then they stumbled across the future coach market, and they saw them as gold bars that will keep their value for infinite amount of time instead of the cash being poured into the cash reserves. Compared to 6 years ago, the price for the future coaches has doubled and even tripled without a real reason, as you don't save more money on conversion. And the only explanation is you could use such players as a loophole to circumvent cash around the financial fair play. And that's not the only issue we had with the transfer market in the recent years. Since 2014, up until 2 or 3 years ago, we still had a decline in user numbers, which resulted in less teams, less players being trained and sold, and a shortage on the transfer market for good players. Right now, we have an inflation, and even normal teams can't afford themselves to buy more than 1 or 2 good trainees. And what happened with the hoarders? They're sitting with 20, 30 or 40 future coaches in their squad, selling them to buy anything they want on a whim. Future coaches are not the only way to circumvent money. You could store it in players or trainees, but you will always pay their higher salaries and they will drop value over time. That's not the issue with future coaches. They retain their value forever and their salaries are laughable. And that's my big issue with the problem. It has no negative side, as everything in Hattrick should have. And the developers, they're aware of this issue for years, and late 2018 they even announced that they're eventually gonna do something about it, and the hammer dropped November 1st, 2020. Hattrick took a stand, introducing a new way of hiring coaches that will start in 3 seasons, combining the external and internal systems together and making the coach some sort of a new staff member with higher salaries. And the big thing, the experience of a player will no longer influence the conversion rate of him being a coach, which makes all future coaches practically useless, because unless you want to really buy a player and convert him into a coach within the 3 seasons, you won't be able to use them as gold bars anymore. And the forum was livid. The hoarders just lost hundreds of millions within one announcement, and the fact that it will happen only in 3 seasons doesn't matter because the damage is from now. They weren't the only ones to get hurt. Some normal teams resolved to future coaches as they didn't see another way to improve their team or transition from one training period to another, losing the money on the future coaches, but also a lot of faith to bring their team to the top, because the inflation on the transfer market and the financial restriction would bind their hands. After 90 minutes and a lot of posts, Hattrick just cancelled their decision completely, saying they needed some time to rethink their solution and not to hurt some teams to such big financial extent. But that just woke the sleeping giant. Most of the teams in Hattrick did not use the future coaches, and the top teams not using it saw it as an exploit and a loophole that gave it users unfair financial advantage with no negative sides. And now that the bubble had been burst, that was the risk those teams were taking all along, and compensating them somehow for taking this risk will be completely outrageous. One thing I have to say, either you're pro or against future coaches, the 2 huge discussions held on the global forum gave birth to a lot of interesting ideas for the developers to consider. Players losing experience or leadership over time, retiring at a certain age, getting injured without playing, increasing the amount of cash that you could store, getting one time a season wealth injections from the result, lots of ideas dealing with the future coach problem, but also some underlying problems in the transfer market, the inflation and the shortage in supply of good players. After a long period of silence, Hattrick released their second announcement 5 days ago, saying that they want to tackle this issue in a broader scope and a more moderate approach, dealing not only with the future coach bubble, but every other player category that might be used as a gold bar merely to store money without benefiting your team. They were pretty vague about their possible solution, but did state that they had a very good grasp about it and it will be implemented August 21 and the intended time of the first announcement. But right now they just want to make sure that the new World Cup format will be held properly, and they will give us the solution at the beginning of the next year. Following the thread of the second announcement and trying to figure out what might be the idea that Hattrick wants to implement, one thing pops into mind. A certain percent of the income that you get from selling a player will directly go to your cash reserves, depending if this player was used as a gold bar or you actually used him to benefit your team. And the percentage might be minute based. Let's say you give a player only 1 minute and keep him as a gold bar because you're afraid he'll get injured. When selling him, all the money will go to the cash reserves. On the other hand, if you take a player and you continually play with him, let's say 90 minutes for a duration of time, when selling this kind of player, all the money will go to your cash funds. And maybe when training a player, the percentage will go even quicker towards the cash funds than in the cash reserve. Let's try and summarize everything together. So Hattrick saw hoarding as a big problem and introduced the financial fair play to deal with it. The hoarders wanted to circumvent the financial fair play and took the future coach market and drove it into a big bubble. Now people were using future coaches as gold bars or sometimes as a fountain of youth teams, when top division teams would take top tier players with 7 leadership from the ages of 27-28 and then sell them for the same amount of money after the skills decreased at the age of 36 because their experience had improved, to buy another younger players and always stay at the top. More and more managers started to exploit the future coach loophole to gain financial advantage on their opponent. They were saying they weren't breaking any written rule, although it was clearly against the spirit of Hattrick and financial fair play. At the beginning, Hattrick did nothing, and they say they regret not stepping in sooner. Eventually, they said they're gonna deal with this problem, and with their first announcement, although being cancelled, the bubble was completely burst. We had the second announcement saying Hattrick has a good idea of what their solution gonna be, and at the beginning of the new season, we're gonna get it. And now we are waiting. And Hattrick, it's all about adapting and moving forward, so it will be very interesting to see in which direction we'll all have to adjust our team and financial play. And now it's your turn. Please tell me what you think and write in the comments. I always read it and it gives me a lot of new insight. From one side, the future coaches were a risk-free loophole. From the other side, I do feel the problem from the transfer market, the prices being inflated, the shortage in supply, and it's very hard to financially perfect your team and drive it to the top. No matter on which side you are, hope you enjoyed this video. You could like it and subscribe to the channel, but more importantly, just remember that Hattrick, it's more than a game, it's a community. So Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year! Ho ho ho!